Hello everyone and welcome back to Agent Nagash, which is a channel dedicated to Sigmar, and in this video, this is going to be my Why Play Orruk Warclans video. So I understood that you guys wanted this video a little while ago, but I was a bit sick, but here we are now doing it. So the idea of this video is quite simply to help you if you're thinking about deciding to do Orruk Warclans, to figure out if it's an army for you. Or if you've already got them, maybe a little bit more motivation for you to continue with that project and get them built and painted, ready for the tabletop when all this lockdown is over. Okay, so firstly, what I'm going to talk about with the Orruk Warclans is going to be their lore. Now, what I will say of these Why Play videos, I don't do a massive deep dive in the lore, I basically do a summary. I have done a longer video talking about Ironjaw's lore, what is a little bit old now, but the lore is still relevant. That will be at the end of the video. There'll be a link to it you can click in case you're interested. But for the Orruk Warclans, let us talk about them. So, essentially, if you were a Warhammer Fantasy player, they are your orcs and goblins. Just take away the goblin bit. So you've got your standard orcs, and you've got your savage orcs as well, with the addition of the Ironjaws from Age of Sigmar. And if you didn't really play Warhammer Fantasy, anything like that, but you do play Warhammer 40k, these orcs basically have the same mindset as the orcs in 40k. Okay, but like I say, these are called Orruks now. Basically, it's a Games Workshop copyright thing, but it essentially means orcs. Well, we'll be referring to them as orcs during this video. Okay, so let's say you didn't understand anything I just said, and you're like, I still don't really know what these Warhammer orcs are. Essentially, imagine mushrooms and fungus that grew very quick and big. Then imagine that fungus has now turned into a massive hulking brute that is charging straight at you with a jagged weapon held high, while shouting at the top of its lungs its war cry, Warg! That, listener, is an Orruk. Orruks live for fighting. It is their only purpose and their dedication to the destruction god of Gorka Morka. When we generally talk about lots of armies on this channel, we tend to mention they have a mission, you know, a goal or a destination, and they will cause destruction or kill anyone or anything that gets in their way. See, this is where the Orruk Warclans are quite different, because their goal is simply to do the middle bit, to do the destruction, to do the killing, to anyone or anything they come across, including themselves in some instances. And what they do is they basically give this thing a name. They call it a warg, which, like I said, is their war cry. It's basically all what these guys live for. It's the fighting, and this is the name they kind of put behind it. And a warg is something that happens when a massive horde of Orruks comes together. So basically a massive army of them all in one place. That is basically like a destruction stampede, knocking over anything it comes across. And there is really no end point to a warg until eventually it is slowed down to the point where there are no enemies left for it to fight, so it starts fighting itself, or in some very specific circumstances that aren't that common, the warg is actually defeated. As by that point the warg has got massive, and you would really need a well-armed, coordinated force to try and take it down. So the Orruk Warclans, they will never stop fighting, and really this isn't out of cruelty. It's not like, I understand Warhammer's a very grey universe, but you know, some forces of chaos, shall we say, they will kill for cruelty. You know, all these different things, like warriors of Slaanesh will basically torture their enemies to cause that agonising pain, because that's what they get off on. Whereas the Orruk Warclans, they're not doing it because they're cruel, it's just simply their nature. And that's really because Orruks are up there as one of the funnest armies and races in the whole of Age of Sigmar, because they fight for fun. It's as simple as that, and the beauty of it is it translates into their position in the mortal realms and indeed on the tabletop in real life as well. Now, I want to break down the Orruks into two main categories. And this will be the Iron Jaws and the Bone Splitters. They are the main forces of the Orruk Warclans. So to talk about the Iron Jaws first, they are quite simply the biggest and the strongest of the Orruk Warclans, led by Gordrak, who is by far the most brutal of all the Orruks in the mortal realms. Now, you may be noticing I've been saying words like, you know, strongest, big, brutal, fighting a lot, and that's basically just because that's the whole ethos of the Orruk, so prepare to hear it a lot more. And you may be thinking, why are they called Iron Jaws though? And that's quite simply because they clad themselves in crude armour that is fashioned with their bare hands, apart from the Arboys, who interestingly are not nearly as big as their brutal towering other kin of the Iron Jaws. However, they are able to craft armour less crudely, but some of this armour, especially like things like brutes, where mega bosses, gore grunters, that sort of thing, it's inches upon inches upon inches thick, and just because of the sheer frame of the Orruks, just how big and strong they are, I'm sure you guys can see pictures, what I've been putting on the screen the whole time, they don't really have a problem if it weighs a lot, because they can kind of handle that without any real problems. So the Iron Jaws believe the bigger and stronger you are is far more important than how many numbers you've got in your army. If we were to compare them to some other greenskins, like, I don't know, the Gloomspike Gitzi very much are all about the numbers rather than being big and strong. So to finish talking about the Iron Jaws, I just want to say a tiny quote from a Gore Grunter big boss. And that is, "Gore Grunters are the best because they are the fastest." That is the end of quote, and it is purely simplicity at its finest, and that is why this army is so fun. Like some of their, you know, artifacts and stuff, they are literally just called things like the big damage dealer, all that sort of stuff, and it will just give you +1 damage. You know, there's none of this fancy trickery around. There is, you know, a lot of stuff in this battle tome to really get your teeth into, and it's really interesting read, but they are just so nice and simple, and not in a boring way. Okay, so moving on to the Bone Splitters. They are quite different on the other hand, because they forsake their armour and quite honestly their sanity as well, and they fight in a much more savage way. They cover themselves in war paint as they don't have the armour, however they believe that it protects them. And as they believe the war paint protects them, as all things work in Age of Sigmar, especially with the Orruks, the war paint protects them, and can be almost just as good as armour in some circumstances, because the Savage Orcs are basically completely naked apart from some PG-13 cloth around their groin area. Even that, like I said, they come from mushrooms and stuff, so I don't think they would need to be sculpted, but it would be very weird otherwise. Anyway, let's continue. We're going off track here, so let's continue. So the interesting thing about the Bone Splitters actually is what makes an Orruk a Bone Splitter is Orruks tend to have an accident which usually involves a big hit to their head, and when, or indeed if, they wake up from this bludgeon to their head, which is a rather traumatic event in most cases, they have had a vision or they can hear voices that have told them to go into the wild and find other like-minded Orruks and form or join an existing clan of them. And these clans are known as the Bone Splitters, and the reason why they are given that name is because they go around hunting monsters and splitting their bones, as they believe the energy of Gorkamorka, their god, is trapped within them. So that is them summarised, and then the Iron Jaws and Bone Splitters clans can either fight by themselves or unite in what is called a big warg. So with the lore done, now that we understand what the Orruk Warclans are, I want to sort of go over some strengths they have, and this can be off the table and on the table. And I want to firstly start by talking about things that are off the table, more of a hobby side of things. They have some really nice models in their range, filled with, quite simply, large, brutal looking models. You've got the massive cladded, you know, Orruks from the Iron Jaws, and then you've got the more savage looking, you know, loony ones from the Bone Splitters. And the nice thing about them is, because until recently, the Bone Splitters and Iron Jaws have been completely separate armies in Age of Sigmar. I knew they were like together in fantasy, but in Age of Sigmar they were separate armies. So if you were to mix them, you may be thinking like, do they actually really work aesthetic wise, because they've been apart for so long, so it's weird to think about them being together. And quite honestly, if you paint them up in the same sort of colour scheme, they're just big orcs as well. You know, the Bone Splitters are the same as the Iron Jaws. Some just wear a bit more armour and some wear a bit more war paint. It's really how it is. You could give your Iron Jaws more war paint. You could paint the what bits of cloth or clothing, you could maybe call it, the Savage Orcs have in the Bone Splitters. You could paint them in the same colour as the armour for the Iron Jaws, just to tie it all together in a nice theme. And especially if you do the bases the same, it just looks fine. Don't worry about that. I also want to note that the Iron Jaws have one of my favourite models, which has got to be a Maw Crusher. It's got to be, for me anyway, one of the best models to come out of Age of Sigmar. It's a reason why they call it like a big cabbage or something. It's just a big, brutal looking dragon. It's a little bit different to like your typical wyvern that was from Warhammer Fantasy. You know, it's not as skinny or that sort of thing, but this thing really does represent the bestial nature of the Iron Jaws, and to be honest, as the Orruk Warclans as a whole. It is such a nice model. There's so many nice ways to paint them up. It's really, really cool. And talking about paint and everything like that, if you feel like you have to paint your orcs green and you're like, oh, I don't really want to do that, it's a bit like everyone else is doing it, for my sake, I really like that bright green, so I'd love to do it that way. But if you're feeling like it's a bit too the same, I've seen some Orruks painted up as like albino ones. I've seen some painted up as black ones. I've seen some painted up as like ashy fire ones. I've seen some painted up in camo. I've seen some painted up wearing a lot more sort of, you know, animal skins. There's so much you can do with that model range. Don't think you have to paint them the same as they are on all the boxes. If you want to do, that's absolutely fine. But, you know, don't feel like you're forced into a way to colour your army. That's not a thing at all with the Orruk Warclans, or indeed with most of the, if not all, armies of Age of Sigmar. You really do have a lot of freedom there. So now that we've talked about the model range and how you can paint them, everything else, to move more onto the table now, this is quite simply an army where you can run up to the enemy and hit them straight in the face with either your chopper or your fist. And there is some really quite wacky fun magic to have with the Orruk Warclans too, so don't feel like it's all melee. And you do have a bit of shooting with the Bone Splitters, but it's not massive, it's not as powerful as it was, but you still have elements there if you would like to. You've got some fast moving things with your Gore Grunters are a little bit nippy, but then you've got your like Savage Boar Boys who are faster. You have loads of movement shenanigans as well, so it's all quite good there. Anything basically to get you quicker to melee is how they work. You can be a very elite army too with the Iron Jaws, so you can be a bit more horde with the Bone Splitters, or you can even be elite with the Bone Splitters as well, having like a mounted army, that sort of thing. And you can mix them together too, and that sort of leads us on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is Legion abilities and all that sort of thing. And the Orruk Warclans have a lot of Legion abilities to choose from, and also sub-allegiances to choose from. So you have the 3 main allegiances, which are going to be Iron Jaws, Bone Splitters, or the Big Warg. So this is essentially when you're building an army, or you're looking at how you're going to run your army, this is the first question you ask. Which one do you go for? So in a simple way I can put it to you, they're all competitive, which is good, because that's not an often common thing. Now, which one is most competitive? Iron Jaws players tend to say theirs most competitive, Bone Splitters tend to say they're most competitive, and then the Big War players tend to say their is the most competitive as well. Sure to say, you can find a tournament-worthy list to take from either 3 of the allegiances. Now, how I would say which one to choose is quite simply, obviously, do what you want. But if you just like Iron Jaw models, if you are what you consider to be a purist of the army, do an Iron Jaws army. That's you, pick that allegiance. Similarly, if you'll feel the same with Bone Splitters, you're like, I love my Bone Splitters, I don't really want to mix the Iron Jaws with them, because a bit of a purist, that sort of thing, stick with Bone Splitters. Now, if you are a bit like I kind of like the feel of the Orcs Goblins how they used to be, and I want to have as much of that in my army as possible. Or you just generally like the idea of mixing, go the big warg, as that means you can put Iron Jaws in your army, Bone Splitters, and then something else we haven't really mentioned in this video is you can put what I would consider normal orcs, which are your typical greenskins from Worm Fantasy, you know, your Orc Boys, Orc Boar Boys, Chariots, Orc Bosses, anything like that. You can put in the big warg. You can even put, you know, like the Wyvern in there if you'd like to. There's lots of cool things you can have. If you're wondering, like, oh, can I just put everything from Orcs and Goblins in there? You can't. It's got to be an Orc model. So what I suggest you do is, if you've got the Age of Sigmar Warshaw app, have a look on there. If you don't have it, why do you not have it? Get that thing. Have a look on there. You can look at all the war scrolls on there. When you go to greenskins, you can see what have the Orc keyword, and then you know that they can go into the big warg. So that can be really quite fun, especially if you are a Warhammer Fantasy player who played Orcs and Goblins and you have quite a few leftover Orcs and you think, oh, how am I going to use them in Age of Sigmar? I feel like I've been left behind. There's not really much use for them anymore. I don't really want to spend loads of money on starting something new. You can use them in this. Now, if you were to ask me, oh, can I make it ultimately competitive if I used the older, you know, Orcs and Goblin models and all that sort of thing in the big warg? I'm probably going to say no. I mean, I don't have experience there, but I imagine the new shiny stuff that Games Workshop wants you to buy is going to be more powerful than the stuff they don't sell anymore, you know, without question. However, it's an opportunity for you to be able to take those models that were redundant and use them in the big warg. I think that is a very nice touch. For me personally, what I would go for out of the 3 allegiances, I would have to do the big warg, purely because I like to mix and match things and I don't want to restrict myself. I want to go, I want that Orc, I want that Orruk, I want that big thing, I want the models I really like from the Bone Splitter range are the Savage Boar Boys. I think they are still called that. I love it because I've played against them at a tournament and I can't remember the opponent I played, but absolutely fantastic chap, and he coloured the Mohicans of the Boars in different colours, bright colours with war paint and everything else to represent what squad they're from, and just tiny things like that. Absolutely awesome. And I don't know if you can still do that in the new rules, but back then in like first edition of Age of Sigmar with the General's Handbook and stuff, he made them fly like 30 odd inches in a turn, which was like flying pigs moving that fast, and they outflanked me and I had suffered terrible consequences because of that, but it was just a load of fun. Yeah, really, really cool. And I also like the big warg because one of the old models I really like and I never managed to get was the old Orruk Wyvern, so if I ever manage to get that, I can put it in that army as well. That's why I mentioned that one earlier. Okay, so those are the 3 main allegiances, and I think I've talked about them enough. Now, the 2, if you go for Iron Jaws and Bone Splitters, they actually have 3 sub-allegiances each to be able to pick. So this book has 3 allegiances and then basically 6 sub-allegiances as well, which is absolutely awesome. Now the big warg, as far as I'm aware, can't take the sub-allegiances from Iron Jaws and Bone Splitters. If I'm wrong about that, I'm sure someone's going to let me know down in the comments, and please do, as I'd like to know as well. But I don't think you can. However, the big warg does have basically like a really cool clocking points mechanics. Basically, you do certain things in the game, gives you what's known as like warg points, and then the more warg points you get are more ongoing abilities where you get to stack them until at the end where something goes boom, essentially. So it's very, very cool. But yeah, so for the Iron Jaws and Bone Splitters, there are 3 sub-allegiances you can go for, which are very cool as well. And just adds loads of options, really. Well, I think that's basically what I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes, just how much options you've got in this book. It's very much an in-depth book, and that's something that I like. It's not like the Ostrich Bone Reapers, where it's like, take Petra Elites. You can take the other ones, but if you want to be super competitive, take this one. You don't feel like you're pushed, or that's not how I felt anyway when I read it. You have quite a bit of freedom to really just to do what you want, essentially, which is really quite cool. And that's why I kind of compare it a little bit to the Slaves Darkness book. It's not exactly the same, but I feel like Slaves Darkness book has got a lot of depth to it. I've been reviewing the Beasts of Chaos books I have at the moment, writing up their lore video for them and their subsequent army videos. And in that, I feel like it's quite an in-depth book as well in terms of options, what you can do. So I really do feel like the Battletomes of Age of Sigmar are getting more and more colourful in what you can do with them. Some are more telling you to choose certain things than others, but the Orruk Warclan Battletome does give you a lot of freedom, which I think is great, because the Orruk Warclans, in lore anyway, like I've already talked about, they don't like being restricted to going like, this is your journey, this is what you have to do, this is your purpose. If you try to tell an Orruk their purpose and what they have to do, they will just quite simply punch you repetitively in the face, and I say repetitively, probably one punch would do it. And yeah, so they're just uncontrollable. It almost sounds like, you know, a chaotic, you know, uncontrollable nature, but you know, it's destruction, it is nature's wrath of them, and that's very much represented in this Battletome. So now we're talking about their sort of strengths. Another cool thing about them as well, like on the table, is there's actually quite a lot of good battalions in this book to choose from. There's not usually like every book has like, oh, auto-include battalions. No, I really feel like battalions have kind of gone downhill a lot in the last few years, but you know, the Orruk Warclans do have some to take there as well, so that's good. Like I've mentioned, they're fast. There's things like the Iron Jaws, I believe, when they get hit in a turn, so when they basically suffer damage in a turn or lose a model, they get to like basically make a movement. And that means that when the enemy is trying to shoot them basically before they get to them, and especially if they shoot the Iron Jaws, that's just going to make the Iron Jaws get closer to them. So it's quite ironic in that. Like I mentioned, they hit really hard, the Orruk Warclans, because they are, if I haven't already mentioned it enough, they are a melee-focused army. You know, like Orruks are meant to be, you know, in lore and everything, they're meant to be the hardest hitting army there are out there, apart from Khorne, because that's all about combat as well. So now to move on to more like the weaknesses of the army, because like I say, we are going to sort of highlight some of the weaknesses, I think, anyway. To start off table first, when they got their update along with Cities of Sigmar back in the summer of 2019, they didn't get any ender spells. They didn't get any seeming pieces, and I know this annoyed a lot of people, and you know, I didn't play the army, but you know, it annoyed me as well. They didn't get those extra models, because I was very much annoyed with Seraphon this year when they didn't either. Well, apart from that senior piece, but Seraphon be wasting a long time. But anyway, the Iron Jaws didn't get spells, which I thought was a really, really missed opportunity. They could have had some really wacky spells. They lost a really cool spell from the Weird Knob Shaman, which essentially was the Foot of Gork, which basically crushed, and stamped on the enemy until they died, repetitively taking D6 mortal wounds, and they took it away from him. Maybe they thought it was a bit too round, a bit too powerful, I don't know. But I thought they were going to take it away from him and then make like a model of that spell. It'd be absolutely awesome. Like a massive, you know, like green foot stamped on its enemies. But they didn't do that. So that's a shame. And I thought for Iron Jaws anyway, that side of things, I thought their train piece would have been a massive pile of scrap, that sort of style, would be very good. Or like as a whole for Orruk Warclans, you know, like a big, you know, rocky idol, which does actually come into, they kind of got a scenery piece given to them by Forge World, which is the Rogue Idol Gork, which is the big monstrosity like golem creature made out of rock. So I suppose you can kind of consider that being their train piece, and that thing is very cool and very powerful. But you know what I mean, it would have been nice if they got some new models. So it's a bit of a letdown, and because they recently got an update, I mean, I can never predict what Games Workshop's going to do, but safe to say they probably won't get an update for a little while yet. So still waiting for that one, especially when it comes to some of the like Bone Splitter models are older than the Iron Jaws ones. The Iron Jaws got new models in Age of Sigmar because they are a new army, but they got very few. And on the Bone Splitter side of things, like I say, they didn't get new models. They are older models. Some of the Bone Splitter models I'm not really a fan of, and that's not because like I don't really like the aesthetic. It's more for like how they're how some of them are posed. I feel like they're all like, you know, like waving spears in the air, but like all in the exact same way, sort of doing like a star jump. Some of them look a little bit repetitive to me, but I'm sure like I haven't really worked much on the kit, so you might be able to repose that in the arms or everything else. But no, so those are sort of like off the table weaknesses. I would say when you go on the table, as far as I'm aware, their shooting, you know, it's not like the best shooting out there. It's not terrible if you go really heavy with the arrow boys, but you know, like it's not the best with what you have in Age of Sigmar now. Also, a bad matchup for the Orruk Warclans would be Heathen Knights of Slaanesh, and I know that's basically a bad matchup for pretty much everyone, but why I was talking about with the Orruk Warclans, because they all tend to, apart from the older orcs, have 2 wounds a pop. So that means if you're taking lots of Bone Splitters, for example, against Heathen Knights of Slaanesh, they're going to get a lot of depravity, which means they're going to summon God knows how many keepers. Another thing I would say about the Orruk Warclans is, I would say they're quite beginner friendly, but when you are starting with them, and like I say, they are, you know, just charge forth and smash the enemy in the face. Like every army, it does require tactics. You know, pick which fights you want to have. Don't just attack everything. You do have to do, you know, target priority and everything like that. There are, if you're clever with things, they do have things like, I think, Smash and Bash and Steel Wall for the Iron Jaw. So basically when one thing's attacked, you can make another thing attack straight away. There's lots of different things to do. It's all, when you're playing an army, that's all about melee. And yeah, you may be very good at melee, you may be able to outperform other armies. Bear in mind, if that is your sort of main and slash only card to play, you have to excel at it. You can't really make mistakes in melee because you don't really have any other phases apart from the combat phase to make up from your lack of damage output. If you attack something you shouldn't have done and you should have focused on something else, maybe the Iron Jaws and the rest of the Orruk Warclans do tend to suffer against a war of attrition. When they hit things, they want to wipe them out and move on to the next thing. They don't really want to be bogged down against like Ostrich Bone Reapers, that sort of thing. They want to be able to hit the enemy, smash through them, and keep on smashing through their lines. They don't really want to be bogged down in any prolonged sort of combat. That's not really their game. They want to hit hard and move on. Okay, so with that, that's pretty much the end. So in a summary, with the Orruk Warclans, what I can say from my own personal experiences, I haven't played Orruk Warclans myself, but back in the day, a few years ago, when the Iron Jaws book came out, I did have a small Iron Jaws army, and I did have some fun with that. Honestly, playing with Iron Jaws is one of the funnest armies I've ever played with. They're just so straightforward, and because, like I say, they are pretty straightforward, you do have to be careful, you know, in your combats and stuff, but because that's your main thing, that's all you're sort of focusing on, it means you can basically enjoy the game a bit more. You can think a bit more about the objectives. You're not having to try and think about everything else your army's trying to do. It's got a very simple task, and it does it pretty goddamn well. And yeah, it's just such a fun army to play. And I'm hoping that this video sort of helped you decide on if it's an army for you or not, or if you've got the army, maybe a bit more motivation to get it done. So, of course, this is a sort of a quick style video. I will, at some point in the future, do a long series on videos for the Orruk Warclans, like I have done for Nighthaunt, Gloomspite Git, Mad King of Nurgle, Flesh Eater Courts, and a lot of other armies. And I have actually done a pretty substantial review on the Iron Jaws, but it was before the Iron Jaws were in the Orruk Warclans, so some things have changed a little bit, but the general idea is still there. And that's actually in the playlist with that Iron Jaws lore video as well, which, like I say, you'll see at the end of the video. For all I know, may have even popped up now. You can click on to get that extra bit of knowledge for sure. But anyway, I hope this video has been helpful to you guys. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, please put them down below. If you feel like I've said anything wrong about the Iron Jaws or the Bone Splitters or anything to do with the Orruk Warclans, please let me know in the comments down below. As like I say, I don't personally play this army. I'm just talking from my opinions on it. So it's really, really good to hear, especially people who play the armies, thoughts in the armies, and yeah, just great to hear your thoughts in general, guys. So, like I say, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and comment down below, as that massively does help the channel, and it's completely free for you guys to do so. A massive shout out to my patrons, who really do a great job helping me make as many videos as I possibly can. Thank you very much for your continued support. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. So remember, until next time, keep washing your hands, staying safe, staying inside, all that sort of jazz. And remember, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.